Hello and welcome to the panel at DublinBIC. Today is Thursday the 30th of April and I'm delighted to be joined today by two entrepreneurs whose businesses are at a fairly early stage of the startup scale-up cycle. They are Katie Farrell of Squid and Deirdre Lyons of Examfly.com. And I'm looking forward to hearing from you about hearing about your businesses and how they are faring up to the challenges of the pandemic. We're also joined by Sheelagh Daly, Entrepreneurship Manager with Enterprise Ireland. I think it'd be fair to say, Sheelagh, that you have a special interest in female entrepreneurship, and that's a subject that we're going to delve into during this discussion also. So Katie, Deirdre and Sheelagh, you're all very welcome.
Thanks.
Katie, if I could begin with yourself, could you introduce us to Squid, please?
Yeah, so Squid is a digital loyalty platform. So basically, you know, the traditional paper loyalty cards, we get them on your phone. So it's a platform for cafes, restaurants and salons to host a really great digital loyalty experience. And for customers, it's a single end user app. So you download from the App Store and you can go use it in over 100 locations across Ireland now, and you can collect your loyalty stamps and redeem rewards from your phone as well. And it's just really quick and easy to use. You can go and find the loyalty card you want. You just take out your phone, you tap it on one of these little tags that we have in the stores, and that's all a store needs as well to get set up. So there's no complicated software or hardware. So we actually have a lot of even coffee little trailers and stuff that move around are on our platform now, because traditionally a lot of platforms wouldn't have really worked for them. So that's what we do anyway. So our main customers are the cafes. They pay a subscription to be on the service, and it's completely free for users to use.
Very good. What's your geographic coverage at the moment?
So we're nationwide at the moment. We're mostly in Dublin. The vast majority of our retailers are in Dublin, and that's just because we launched there initially. But now we are expanding. We've got locations in Cork, we're in Wicklow, we're in Donegal. So we're getting businesses sign up pretty much from across the country because I suppose they're all active on social media. They see other businesses posting about us, and then they get onto us and want to get on the platform too.
So Katie, why Squid? How did you come to be a loyalty app entrepreneur?
Yeah, so I suppose I've always been interested in business. Even like as a kid, I would have always been annoying my family with my little pretend businesses and things like that. But then when I got to school, I didn't do business, I suppose, from like junior cert level, because I wanted to take art, and then I realized I like science and focused on I just did all science subjects for my leaving cert, and I went on to do engineering. So I suppose from engineering to loyalty app is a little bit random, but what engineering is all about problem solving, I suppose. And I did do a startup weekend while in college with my best friend from college, Matthew, and he's my co-founder at Squid. So it was during that startup weekend that we were kind of like, oh, this would actually be a really cool thing to do. Like, we'd never really thought probably of having our own startup. So that probably sparked the interest initially. And then when we finished up in college, we just thought, you know, let's give it a go. And we kind of further explored that idea. And talked to a lot of different cafes. We did a lot of kind of just background research while we were doing other part-time jobs, and we realized there was an interest out there.
Okay, so like no business could have been more affected by the pandemic lockdown than yourselves. So how have you managed that?
Yeah, so a lot of the businesses did shut down when all the lockdown restrictions were introduced. And so we decided that what we do is focus on a lot of the areas that we had actually been kind of putting aside, because we've been so busy with sales really up to that point. And like every day was just kind of sales and onboarding, and a lot of the other stuff were being pushed aside. Like there was a lot of product features that we hadn't developed that we'd wanted to, and even things like our website needed upgraded, and the way we were doing onboarding was very manual and a bit slow. So we reckoned that this was a really good opportunity to work on those things. So we're now going to get an onboarding flow developed. We've been upgrading our website, and we've started designing new features. We rolled out a feature, actually a voucher purchase feature, so you can purchase vouchers for stores even if they're closed or open at discount, and you can just redeem them with the tag in store as well. So it's contactless as well, which is good for the current situation where businesses are takeout only, and
That's
probably
great.
will be for quite some time.
So you're very much a disciple of the philosophy to never waste a good crisis, and you're using it for
Yeah.
development. And yeah, superb, great. Okay, thank you
And
for
a
that.
lot of the businesses are kind of opening up now again for takeaway only. I think they've had time to kind of assess the situation. I suppose at the beginning we didn't know how long this is going. We still don't know how long it's going to go on for. But you know, at the beginning there was maybe a sense of maybe this is only 2 weeks, so we'll just close and reopen. But now I think businesses are realizing that they're going to have to adjust if they want to stay open. So they are transitioning to like opening for takeaway only now. So we're getting back to encouraging them to get the most out of the platform, getting back onto those existing customers, and also we're starting back up with sales. So we should have 3 businesses joining this week, which is small compared to our normal numbers, but it's good that we're getting back on track, and we're still getting a lot of use in the businesses that are still open. We still have a lot of engagement with the platform, so it's not affecting it in those businesses. So we're seeing that as positive, that we can get that back on track.
Very good, Katie. Thank you very much. Deirdre, if I could come to you, can you introduce Examfly to us, please?
Yeah, so Examfly Learning, what we do is design online learning tools for professional exams. So think subjects like tax, law, or accountancy. People who are studying for these exams, which they need to progress in their career, typically working full time, so time poor. The exams are tough, so failure rates can be up to 50% in some subjects. What we noticed was the current online offering can be quite passive, and therefore a bit unengaging. So in the age of diminishing attention spans with mobile phones, that's a big problem, to expect people to sit down and, I suppose, consume a lot of very dense material in the old way. So what we've tried to do is use techniques from education psychology that tell you how to make learning engaging and effective, and combine that with technology techniques, say from the likes of video games or social media, that engage people and increase their usage, in order to design platforms that make the study for these exams quicker and more effective.
Very good. Now, I might get myself into trouble by saying this, but professional institutions wouldn't always be noted for being the most innovative organization. So I'm wondering, how have they taken to the prospect of moving over to online learning and moving over to online learning that has a new innovative pedagogy associated with it?
I think, I suppose the move was coming to online anyway, when, you know, the days of people commuting for an hour and a half to come sit in a lecture hall on a Saturday or in an evening, there had to be online offerings anyway. So most of the institutions, I would say, you know, were already on top of that. I suppose what my own experience of that was, and what some of our market research told us, was that was largely the digitization of the existing content. And what I mean by that was, it was the same kind of books, the same kind of lectures, just delivered through an online channel. So what we're proposing to do, or what we've built, is something very different to that. It's much more interactive, much more engaging, and trying to bring in those techniques that make, you know, social media and video games quite addictive, trying to use them for the students' good in learning. So our approach would be quite different. As to their responses, I guess it can depend by institution. I'm not going to mention any names, but we've had some very, very encouraging discussions with certain ones who understand that students are demanding better solutions. A lecture or a book that's of a certain quality is not going to be improved just because it's delivered online. You have to take a broader approach, and you have to see, really, can technology be used in a way that improves the learning experience. So our first 2 customers are education bodies of that nature. So we've been delighted to find champions in there who've seen some of what we've done. So that might include animated explainer videos, which give a high-level entry point into difficult topics, essentially in cartoon format, which students seem to love. Secondly, interactive games that again have gamification and adaptive learning built in, so students can test themselves. So we found champions within these institutions who have, I suppose, seen the promise of what we're doing, seen our initial feedback from early users. And just last week we went live with our first customer on the back of one of those engagements, and the initial feedback has been very positive to date. So that's encouraging.
Congratulations. Do you envisage that the pandemic and all of the behavioral changes that have gone with that could actually accelerate the adoption of professional online learning?
Yeah, I think the main thing it will do is that people will realize that not all online solutions are created equally. And that mainly comes back to the point that I made about if what you're doing is mainly the digitalization of the existing content, that's still a highly passive learning experience, albeit that it's delivered online and you can access it in a more flexible way. What the academic studies would say, and we've engaged with the Learnovate Centre in Trinity College around this, is when you're talking about skill acquisition. So these subjects are all around skill acquisition. You're acquiring knowledge not just to kind of regurgitate it back like you might have for the Leaving Cert. You're acquiring it in order to apply it. So when it comes to skill acquisition, the best type of learning is active learning. In other words, testing yourself, applying the knowledge, getting feedback, learning from your mistakes. And the academic studies will back that up. So that's why we have such a high focus on interactivity in what we do and adaptive learning. So yeah, I guess so. That is something that is probably already seeming to be a dawning realization. We've had some calls from, say, L&D people in some of the big firms who are more interested now in having conversations, because they do realize that just sending out the same old material by email isn't necessarily going to provide a very effective learning experience or an enjoyable one, especially in an age of diminishing attention spans.
Very good. Thank you. That was very interesting. Sheelagh Daly, Entrepreneurship Manager with Enterprise Ireland, if I could come to you on the subject of female entrepreneurship. What is the state of the nation in Ireland? How are we doing in respect to female entrepreneurship here?
Hi, Martin, Katie and Deirdre. Well, I suppose the reality is that we still see a very significant gender imbalance when it comes to women both starting and growing businesses. We're still in a situation in Ireland where 3 times as many men are starting and growing businesses and employing people. So it's still a challenge. And Enterprise Ireland, a number of years ago, was looking at it specifically in the context of our high potential startups. So as you would know, we fund approximately 100 high potential startups with investment funding on an annual basis. And back in 2011, we were looking at only 7 of those actually included a female founder. So we decided at that point to put a specific focus and target on increasing the number of female founded high potential startups. And we did that by introducing a number of different initiatives, including capability development programs like Going for Growth and like Innovate specifically for women that had applied for the Competitive Start Fund. And we also introduced, and this was particularly successful, we targeted women with the Competitive Start Fund, so financial intervention specifically targeted at women. And the outcome of that was that, in 2019, we're now at 21%. So that's a pretty significant achievement to have trebled the number. And it came about by putting that laser-like focus and targets in place. But I suppose that towards the end of 2018, early 2019, I was asked to look at developing a new strategy for women in business for Enterprise Ireland. And I suppose as we worked through the research and the consultation that we did, it became very apparent that if we were going to see a significant shift, a significant sustainable shift across the board in Irish enterprise, we needed to broaden the focus that we were taking. So we worked on developing that new strategy. It's a 6-year strategy to 2025, and it now includes 4 objectives, one of which is a continuation. We will continue to focus on increasing the number of female-founded high-potential startups. but we also are looking at increasing the number of women becoming entrepreneurs, increasing the number of women-led enterprises that scale on international markets. And very importantly, and quite a significant departure, I suppose, for Enterprise Ireland, looking at increasing the number of women in senior management and leadership positions. And I suppose the key thing about this strategy is that all those 4 objectives are interlinked. So to achieve one of them, you really need to achieve all of them. So in January, we launched our 2020 action plan for women in business, which is basically those supporting actions that we have committed to embarking upon during the course of 2020. And there are 6 actions supporting each of the objectives, so 24 actions in total. Some of those we can deliver on directly ourselves. So for example, just before the lockdown, we launched a new key manager grant for part-time key managers. And this speaks very much to that objective of getting an increase in women in senior leadership and management positions in Irish companies. While the grant is not restricted only to women, but we believe from all of our research that it is one of the things that would potentially help to appeal to more women to go into senior management positions if there was some degree of flexibility around it. And it's a way of supporting our companies, our client companies, to look at this issue and to put out there their intention to increase the percentage of women in senior leadership positions in their companies. That's just one example.
So if I can ask you, Sheelagh, you know, why do we need to discuss this? What are the challenges that are facing female entrepreneurs that, you know, from what you're saying, it's moving in the right direction, but we're not there yet. So what are those challenges?
Yeah, it is moving in the right direction. And I think we definitely are seeing that momentum build up across all the spectrums that I've mentioned. I think it's difficult to give you a one sentence on this. It's extremely complex and the challenges are very much interconnected. But if I was going to sum it up, I'd probably talk about 4 things. So, and I call them the 4 C's. So the first one is cash. And we do know there's significant amount of data available, particularly in relation to investment funding, that there is a very disproportionate amount of funding going to male-only led companies, and even where women-led companies are getting the funding, they're usually getting proportionately less than might be going to. So while there are but there are lots of reasons behind that. Some of which are to do with the sectors that women are operating in, some of which are to do with just the fact that the ecosystem is designed and quite male-oriented and quite male-dominated. And this can lead to difficulties for women in accessing finance for their businesses. The second one then is in relation to connections. And connections are extremely important, as we know, to start or to grow your business. And just again, for a multiplicity of reasons, men generally tend to have a much broader set of business connections than women. And again, that goes back to the sectors that women are operating in, the levels of seniority that they might be operating at, and so on. Culture then underpins all of this. And culture can be everything from institutional barriers like the cost of childcare, the fact that women do tend to still take the bulk of responsibility for home and family, to just the way entrepreneurship is perceived and talked about, not by any malice, but just simply because of history. The enterprise and business culture was developed in a very male way. It was developed by men for men. So that, you know, it's difficult to pin it down, but that does need to be recognized, and attempt made to sort of change that and make it a more all-encompassing, diverse approach. And I suppose that the final one then is this awful word confidence, which what that really is talking about, again, relates back to why people would actually make the decision to start a business. And we know that a lot of that is related to both belief in themselves, belief in the idea, but belief in their underlying capability and being able to access the supports that they need in order to take the risk and make the jump and start that business, or indeed take the risk to grow their business by taking on additional funding. So as I said, I don't know if I've answered it particularly well, but it is complex, and all of these reasons are actually interconnected.
That's extraordinarily interesting, Sheelagh. Thank you. So we've gone from 7% of the HPSU supported by Enterprise Ireland in 2011 being female-led or having a female in a significant position in those companies to 21% in 2019, a 3 times increase over about 8 years. That's pretty significant. I have to congratulate yourself and your colleagues in Enterprise Ireland on that. Well done. And very interesting to hear those 4 C's, cash, connections, culture and confidence, are the areas where we have to make further inroads in order to balance the scales here. Just on the cash piece, I know it's not just a matter of fewer women receiving funding and getting smaller amounts, it's also fewer of the funders are women. And I know there's been specific efforts from the Halo Business Angel Network here in Ireland in the last months and years in order to increase the number of female investors they have there, perhaps to give a greater empathy with female entrepreneurs there. But my last question to you, Sheelagh. So we've seen over the last few weeks from Finland and Norway to New Zealand that female-led countries with female prime ministers and presidents and so on seem to, on average, have fared better in the pandemic. And there's been various discussions about why that might be. My question to you is there something different about female leadership? Is there particular modes of working that women bring to a leadership role?
Yeah, I think this is a really, really interesting one, and I'd say there'll be lots of heated debate over drinks whenever the pubs open again as to this. I mean, I'd include Angela Merkel in what you in the countries you mentioned, and there's Denmark as well, and Taiwan, I think, as well. But I think that the fact of it is that women are disproportionately represented in the group of leaders that have done particularly well in this pandemic. And that's talking about international recognition based on the deaths, the proportion of deaths per 100,000 and so on. Obviously, there's lots of male leaders who have done extremely well, and I would be remiss if I didn't say that Ireland is particularly internationally well recognized. So it's when you look at the style of leadership that was applied, I think it's very interesting, because I think what we will learn from looking at this is that the style of leadership requires, I would say, what could be called a more feminine approach, but that can equally be applied by a man or a woman towards their leadership, the leadership approach they take. And I suppose I would say that there are 4 key elements to that. The first one is listening. So that genuine ability to admit that you don't know everything and that you need to listen, and genuinely listening and taking on board what people are saying, bringing the experts together, taking on board what people are saying, really listening to what people are saying, and also listening to what the public are saying and how the public are reacting. Genuine listening. The second one then is collaboration. Something like this needs a team effort. It's not something where you can just, be the sort of the gung-ho dictatorial, it's my way or no way type of leader. This needs team and collaboration. And it also needs a recognition of the contribution of all of the team members. And I suppose that the third thing then I would say is empathy. And that ability to communicate openly, honestly, transparently, and to just be more human and show the human side of yourself and be able to connect with people and bring people with you, because you're seen as being, open, honest, and actually genuinely understanding people's fears and concerns, and I suppose the authenticity that goes with that. The final one then is a sort of a requirement, clearly, to be able to make decisions quickly. But all of those combined together really make an excellent leadership style, regardless of the situation, but in this particular situation, particularly important. And I think that's where you see that perhaps that is a style that women would naturally tend towards, and that, you know, perhaps not so much, that women would not be as likely to maybe tend towards the very opposite styles that unfortunately we have some awful examples of, you know. So I think that's really what I would say about that.
Very good. That was very comprehensive. Thank you for that. If I could throw this subject open to the floor here, Katie and Deirdre, female leadership and your experience of being an entrepreneur, is it any different to what a man might experience?
I'm thinking a little bit of Carl Jung, I think, quote, which goes something along the lines of, if we do not make what is unconscious conscious, it will direct us, and we will call it fate. So, in other words, what's going on underneath the surface that's driving our behavior, sometimes we're not always aware of. And that kind of reminds me a lot of some of the points that Sheelagh made around culture and confidence and kind of conditioning. You could add another C there. So I guess where I'm getting to with this is that there was a couple of things that I've had to look at myself, and I'm not sure that this is a uniquely female challenge, but where I had certain unconscious beliefs that maybe were a bit limiting. First of all, maybe around money. So not being squeamish about having discussions about the financials of a company. So I spent 10 years in corporate life, first in PwC, then in Davy, and it took me a long time to realize that there's two layers to any business. First layer is the product or service that you develop or sell, and then the second layer is the business apparatus or the money-making machinery that goes around that. And if you just are always stuck in the first layer, making the best product or the best service in a very kind of diligent way, like we get rewarded for in school and college, and never move beyond that to those discussions, and some of them have to be maybe informal at first, that you're kind of curious about, all right, well, which sectors are doing well, which are doing less well, how did that product launch go, you know, that it's those kind of discussions that you find that people who end up in senior management roles start having early and often, and aren't squeamish about having. Now, I'm not saying that the squeamishness is necessarily a feminine trait, but it was certainly one that I had to unlearn a bit. And likewise, as an entrepreneur, you know, it can't be just about developing the best product or the best service. You have to go up to layer 2 and look at the money-making thing around it. And again, without saying that this is a naturally female trait, you know, you have to be commercial and not wanting to be seen as just the nicest person in every conversation, you know, just make sure you're logical and rational and commercial about it. So that's some learning that I had to do, and some unlearning of these unconscious beliefs that, you know, it's maybe impolite to talk about the money aspects around things. The second thing, yeah, the confidence point that Sheelagh mentioned, I guess, again, you know, in certain areas of life, being self-deprecating, you know, it's non-threatening. It can maybe stop you from experiencing any kind of tall poppy syndrome where, you know, or generating resentment or anything like that. It's probably a defense mechanism. But in a startup, by definition, you're trying to create something out of nothing. And if you don't believe, and if you're not able to tell your story in a convincing way, then investors aren't going to. How could they? Customers aren't going to. It's kind of like Tinkerbell and Peter Pan, you know, you just be believed in order to exist. I think startups are a bit like that, particularly in early stage. So again, that's something I'm trying to work on in my language around how I talk about the business, how I talk about myself, that, you know, modesty and self-deprecation definitely have their places, but you have to bring across the confidence that you have in what you're doing. Otherwise, you can't expect other people to believe it. So yeah.
Deirdre, thank you for that. You take the prize for being the first to bring Carl Jung and Tinkerbell and Peter Pan to the panel at DublinBIC. You use them to illustrate your point very well, and I think that was a very personal reflection of the 4 C's that Sheelagh was talking about there. So thank you very much for that. Katie, anything to say to us on this subject?
Yeah, so I suppose for me, I had a lot to learn about my own leadership style just altogether, because this was something that was very new to me. This was my first kind of full-time job, and not just like part-time or smaller jobs in college and stuff. And I did have like some corporate internship experience, but this was kind of my first experience of like this whole lifestyle as well. So, and what's different about our team too is that we kind of have a joint leadership. Myself and my co-founder Matthew would lead together, and it's a very small team as well. So it's obviously it depends very much on the business as well, I think. There would be some elements of where our leadership styles would be different. I'm not sure if it's particularly a male-female thing. I like to kind of gather up all the facts before I make a decision. Maybe it's going back to Sheilagh's point about the listening. I like to, get feedback on things. I like to make sure that I've looked into everything. And I suppose on the confidence point, I would have been a bit more hesitant at the beginning, like going for this. Whereas Matthew was more, let's go for it, it's going to work. Whereas I was like, maybe I should get a year or two's experience. Maybe that would be more helpful to the business. There were those kind of things. I'm obviously really glad I went for it, because I've learned so much in this. It's just been a little bit over a year, and I've learned so much. And I think I've learned so much more than I would if I'd tried to get experience by going into a graduate job, and about myself and my leadership as well. And it's been interesting just seeing, even just across the team, just kind of diverse personalities. And I kind of like that everyone knows what they're doing, and then we kind of go and do our jobs and then go back and discuss things and reassess, whereas others in the team prefer a lot more communication. And that was something that cropped up then, especially during this situation where everyone's working at home. So like we've started now doing like daily calls, like 20-minute calls, where everyone says what they've done and what they're going to be doing. And that was something we'd never really done, but I think it suits others in the team, and that's really important to make them enjoy the kind of working experience and feel like things are being kind of led for them. So yeah, that's something I have noticed. In terms of Deirdre's point about the money, I suppose, was something that in the beginning, when you kind of hear the figures of the amount of money that people will be raising for their businesses, it's like, oh gosh. I don't know if that was just my kind of lack of experience with business and startups as well, though. So definitely, I think there definitely are, subtle differences between kind of males and females as startup founders, but I think it really does depend on individual personalities as well. And I think for us, definitely our age, like the fact that we were just kind of out of college, does make a difference. It makes a difference to the leadership style as well, because everyone on your team is kind of young and your friends, and you don't want to come across too kind of authoritarian, but you do have to kind of be strict and say, no, this is what has to get done. So I found that more of a difficult balance, really. But I suppose the positive probably side of being younger is that there's less maybe gender biases. Just like this generation is a bit more kind of open to that. It doesn't really make too much of a difference, or you don't really see people in too much of a different light. So that would be my take on that.
Very good. If I could be so bold as to make my own contribution here, working with DublinBIC, we've had the pleasure of assisting Enterprise Ireland with some of those accelerator programs that they run. So Katie and Deirdre are both recipients of the Competitive Start funding from Enterprise Ireland, the €50,000 investment in your businesses. And as part of that, you also go on the 13-week Innovate Accelerator program of Enterprise Ireland, which is run by DublinBIC, and I have the pleasure of working on that, and on many other accelerator programs with both men and women. But the difference with the female-only Innovate Accelerator program, from my perspective and the perspective of all of my colleagues in DublinBIC who work on it, is the absolutely extraordinary level of peer-to-peer collaboration that goes on between the female participants on that accelerator program. It is 24 hours a day and always online and always there to assist and add to and push along and motivate and so on, which you simply do not see on other accelerator programs where it's mainly men or some mix of men and women on it. I'm not going to speculate as to why that is. I'm just telling you from my own experience, it most definitely is the case, and it gives me great confidence that we're already moving in the right direction, and we're certainly going to move further in that direction. On that note, if I may, I'd like to say thank you to Katie Farrell from Squid, to Deirdre from Examfly Learning, and Sheelagh Daly from Enterprise Ireland. Thank you very much for your contributions to the panel at DublinBIC.